Hi, y'all. Welcome to this edition of History and Highballs, from Seances to Spirit Boxes, 200 years of exploring the supernatural. My name is Stacy, and I handle adult education here at the museum. So whenever you join us for one of these History and Highballs programs, you and I get to virtually spend the evening together, listening to some incredible stories about North Carolina places and people, and what makes our state so special. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we invite you to head over to the museum's new website at ncmuseumofhistory.org, where you can learn more about our upcoming programs, exhibits, and digital resources. This is also where you can find out more information about joining our North Carolina Museum of History Associates and supporting our North Carolina Museum of History Foundation. Our associates and foundation provide crucial funding and support to the museum, which, in addition to many other things, helps make programming like tonight's program possible. We would also like to thank those of you who donated funds towards this evening's program. We continue to do our best to keep our programs free to attend, but there are, of course, costs associated with keeping our series going, and we just continue to be so grateful for your generous support of the museum. A few quick housekeeping items for tonight. We ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the entirety of the program, and to please type any questions that you have for our guest speakers into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. At the end of the program, our adult programs intern Destiny will ask our speakers as many of your questions as time allows. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome this evening's, or I should say welcome back, this evening's speakers. We have Nelson Nauss, Executive Director and co-founder of the Ghost Guild, Kelly McConkey, co-founder of the Ghost Guild, Devon, Gailey, Christina Zellis, and Allison Miller, Ghost Guild and those folks are all Ghost Guild investigators. So Kelly, I think that you're going to start us off. I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. So we are the Ghost Guild, and we are excited to be here tonight. We want to express our gratitude to the North Carolina Museum of History for hosting us for what we hope will be a fun, informative, and fascinating edition of History and Highballs. First off, we're excited to announce that one person from each of our presentations this month will be entered into our very cool October drawing. By registering for this program and staying till the grand finale of the presentation tonight, you could be one of those magnificent 9 contenders. Winners will be announced on Halloween, and prizes include the following. 2 lucky winners will receive tickets for themselves and a guest to enjoy the Haunted Hillsborough Ghost Walk Tour. They will meet with their ghost host, Enoch Pugh, a regulator who was hung after the 1770 Hillsborough riots, and take a historical and spooky stroll through one of North Carolina's oldest towns. 2 other lucky winners will win $50 gift certificates to the former Coffin House and now allegedly haunted restaurant, Death and Taxes in downtown Raleigh. And the remaining 5 winners will receive some very cool Ghost Guild merchandise. And I don't know if you noticed, but Nelson was drinking out of one of our Ghost Guild wine glasses, and that is one of the prizes that you might win. So just remember that you must be present at the end of the presentation when we select tonight's lucky participants that will be entered into this drawing. So just a little bit about us. The Ghost Guild is a paranormal investigation team founded here in Raleigh by myself and Nelson Nauss in January of 2017. Something that makes us a little bit different from other teams is that we became a registered nonprofit organization in July 2018. Everyone on the Ghost Guild is passionate about history, science, and the unexplained, and it is our mission to give back to our community and aid in the preservation efforts of historical sites by bringing their history to life in a unique way and opening their doors to a wider audience. Through the years, we have collected some awesome like-minded individuals to join us on this journey, each of whom you will get to meet throughout this presentation. To tell you a little bit about me, my name is Kelly McConkey, and I work for a local university as a licensed clinical mental health counselor and expressive arts therapist. I love pizza, theater, biking, and my dog Whiskey, and hunting ghosts, which I have been fascinated with since childhood, as you can see here, my little Kelly McConkey ghost costume. All right. So although tonight's presentation will focus on the paranormal as experienced and investigated over the last 200 years, I thought it was important to name that the belief in the supernatural or paranormal spans back thousands of years and across all cultures. In fact, archaeologists have discovered evidence that humans have held a belief in ghosts for at least the last 3,500 years. The clay tablets shown here come from the ancient Mesopotamia region and date back to approximately 2000 to 1500 BCE. Cuneiform is one of the oldest forms of writing in the history of humankind. And according to Dr. Irving Finkel, curator of the Middle Eastern Department at the British Museum, the cuneiform writing and picture carved into the clay tablet on the left tells the story of how to get rid of a pesky ghost. So how you do this, you would carve figurines of the ghost being led back to the underworld by a lover. Along with the carvings and some form of offering, an incantation would be spoken, and it was believed that the spirit of the ghost would go into the figurine, which you could then bury into the ground, and it would make it easier for the god of the underworld to take the spirit back to the land of the dead. The tablet on the right, also in cuneiform, and forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly, is an example of an incantation people would recite to banish a ghost who was causing illness. So most likely the belief in ghosts were held long before this time, but it's just one of the oldest pieces of archaeological evidence that illustrates that such beliefs have existed for thousands of years. Next slide. So although the cultures of the various Mesopotamia civilizations have long since vanished, we actually continue to see examples of how different cultures from around the world have continued not only to believe in ghosts, but to honor, celebrate, and incorporate their beliefs into annual traditions all around the world. From the Japanese Obon Festival to Mexico's Dia de los Muertos ceremony, and my personal favorites, Halloween, which is based on the ancient Irish Celtic festival known as Samhain. Traditions that have been around for hundreds to thousands of years. But we are here to talk about the last 200 years. So with no further ado, let me welcome Christina Zellis.
Hey everyone, my name is Christina Zellis, and I will be talking about setting the stage for the spiritualism movement. Now, the roots of the spiritualism movement go back farther than the 1840s. It is rooted in European thinkers, as well as pockets of our own regions across the US. So on this slide, we have the man on the left, the man on the right, Franz Mesmer. He is most known for mesmerism and hypnosis, but he thought that one part of human beings was that you had magnetic fluid running through your body, and blockages would stop this flow, and that using magnets could fix that. Obviously, we know that doesn't really work now, but it was integral to the time. And the guy on the left with the glasses is Andrew Jackson Davis, and he was known as the Poughkeepsie Seer, and is also considered as one of the fathers of the spiritualism movement. And he ties in very nicely with some of the very first figures we're going to touch on, and that is the Fox sisters. In 1848, Hydesville, New York, the Fox sisters, Margaretta, Catherine, and Leah Fox, started hearing knocks on their wall right before bedtime. And they started thinking, okay, what is communicating with us? So they started asking questions and started receiving responses in return. The community got wind of this as it kept happening night after night, until finally it moved out of Hydesville, New York, and brought them into places like Corinthian Hall. And it was thanks to them that the spiritualist movement really kicked into high gear. So coinciding with the spiritualism movement was social and political change happening in the United States. Women were exploring ways in which they could address the many inequalities that were facing them at the time. Similarly, people's religious perspectives were also beginning to shift, and not just in the ways that we communicate with the dead and communicate with afterlife, rather. Scientific advances, thinking about and understanding the physical world, as well as the life afterwards, were prevalent. With this fascinating combination, there was also the Civil War. And this, of course, was a mass casualty event. And not only was this the first war that was photographed, meaning more people could see it than ever before, this was the first time that death really took place away from the home. Whereas, the good death prior to the Civil War meant you would take care of the bodies in your home, and it was a very personal experience. But with the Civil War, we started seeing the advent of embalming and having the bodies farther away from home and being buried farther away from home. So with death on everyone's mind, it kind of came into that collective consciousness. And we see a lot of important historical figures start to really get themselves integrated into this movement. On our left, we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote a little book about famous detective Sherlock Holmes. He was an avid attendee of seances and was a very firm believer. Mary Todd Lincoln, unfortunately, she lost her son and obviously her husband during the Civil War, and used the spiritualist movement and seances as a means to connect with her family, even though they were no longer here. And finally, Charles Dickens, we have, wasn't necessarily an avid believer, but he did write A Ghost Story, which is a famous Christmas carol. So with all of these things being said, we start focusing on the tools of the trade, the means of communication that we used back in the day that you will later see in this presentation carry on today. And as I've already mentioned, seances. Now, if you've seen movies like The Awakening or the Insidious franchise, you've probably seen a seance. It's when people sit around the table in the dark, holding hands by candlelight, asking questions. Usually, this entailed having a medium, and that medium was usually a woman. Thinkers at the time attributed that to being women being more spiritual, but it might actually be because women could find that independence and earn their money through doing public engagements. But obviously, the spirits could talk through the medium, but they could also do table turning. So the table kind of tilt in accordance with answering certain questions. Spirit rapping, which is what the Fox sisters heard in Hydesville. Levitation, where people allegedly levitated, or objects in the room being levitated. And materialization. If you've seen spirit photography in the past where you see ectoplasm, that was one of the ways in which they believed spirits would manifest in the room during a seance. Now, what you see on TV is a lot like they did back in the day. A lot of us are sitting around in the dark asking questions to whatever entity is out there, and we hope that we get responses. So we kind of still carried that over. But beyond seances, we also had other objects. And in this photo, we see the spirit trumpet. This was believed to, what is the word for it? Amplify, thank you, Nelson, off screen. The voices of the dead during, when you ask questions. And there was actually an interesting story in the news about the spirit trumpet levitating around the room, which probably was terrifying, but that's beside the point. We also had Ouija boards, which I think we'll touch on a little bit more later on. They were also used during seances. People would sit around the table and have the planchette move in accordance with alphabet and questions. And then dowsing rods, which are still used today by investigators. You would denote whether or not the rods would cross, and then that would mean yes or no. We don't necessarily use them, but they are something that a lot of paranormal investigators use in their toolbox. And finally, this is actually a very interesting example of the spirit photography that people had in the 1800s into the 19th century. Stanislawa Popielska, pardon my pronunciation, has a great example of ectoplasm, which was often just cheesecloth being pulled from people's mouths, but it was perpetuated as the idea of materialization. In Dr. William J. Pierce's photograph, you see orbs, which are something that we see a lot of photographs today of that. And then the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. All of these are hit or miss as far as whether they're legitimate, but it does show that even back then, people were still interested in capturing photographic evidence. And it brought, it caused people to start thinking about, what is real, and apply that analytical thinking that we try to do today. So with that, I will turn over to Devon Gailey.
Hello. Yes, I'm Devon. I'm a social media manager and a potential YouTuber by day. And I've been with the Ghost Guild for 2.5 years now. So yeah, let's get into it. I am first going to be talking about the decline of spiritualism. You can see it right there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so first, let's cover skeptics and societies. So to start off, in 19th century Britain, people weren't just asking if ghosts existed, they were asking how, when, and why they might exist. So in comes the Ghost Club. This club was founded in 1862, and it mainly focused on investigating supernatural encounters and exposing frauds. So Charles Dickens is said to be a founding member of this group. He actually wrote, "My own mind is perfectly unprejudiced and impressible on the subject. I have not yet met with any ghost story that was proved to me." However, he did also boast of his own magnetic powers and dabbled in mesmerism. So I wouldn't say he was exactly the most skeptical person in the world. His first investigation was the infamous spirit cabinet created by the Davenport brothers. Essentially, what this is the two brothers were tied up in a cabinet and obscured from the audience's view. Then things would occur around the cabinet that seemed to have a supernatural origin, unless, of course, the people inside weren't tied up anymore. Another interesting thing to note here is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is going to come up a lot, would never falter in his belief that the Davenport brothers were actually conjuring spirits. Doyle believed that Houdini and the Davenport brothers' abilities all came from some supernatural place. He went on to actually compare Houdini and the Davenport brothers, saying, "I'm quite sure that if the Davenport brothers had done their performance as if it were a conjuring trick and had never told the honest and unpopular truth that it was actually of psychic origin, they would have amassed a comfortable fortune." So this is all going to bring me to the next slide, where we mentioned Harry Houdini, which again, I'm sure everyone is familiar with. He actually became known for his skepticism of the spiritualist movement during this time. Despite Houdini's book and his criticism of the Davenport brothers, he and Doyle actually became good friends. He once characterized Doyle as sincere but deluded, and the two spent considerable time trying to convert the other to their beliefs. However, neither side prevailed. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the development of scientific protocols. So to start, the Society for Psychical Research actually originated from a discussion between journalist Edmund Rogers and the physicist William F. Barrett in 1881. So I've listed some of the key members here across the top, but the main takeaway is that this group was founded to examine without prejudice and in a scientific spirit those faculties of man, real or supposed, which appear to be inexplicable on any generally recognized hypothesis, which is just a really cool way of saying we want to apply science to the supernatural. They focused on hypnotism, dissociation, thought transference, apparitions, haunted houses, and the physical phenomena associated with seances. They did, however, receive criticism from both sides, from skeptics and spiritualists. In fact, Doyle resigned from the SPC in 1930 to protest their overly strict standards of proof. But skeptical member Eric Dingwall resigned, and he also wrote that after 60 years experience and personal acquaintance with most of the leading parapsychologists, I do not think I could name half a dozen whom I would call objective students. So on my next slide, I won't have a ton of time to go into great detail, but I thought this would be a fun last edition, especially for locals who know or who have heard of the Rhine Research Center in Durham. So Joseph Banks Rhine is known as the father of modern parapsychology. He actually comes onto the scene around 1927. Prior to this, he hears Sir Arthur Conan Doyle speak at the University of Chicago in 1922, discussing the scientific proof of communication with the dead. Rhine states that this mere possibility was the most exhilarating thought that I had had in years. And honestly, same, I get it. But only 4 years later, while Rhine was exposing a popular medium of fraud, Conan Doyle would publish an article in the Boston Globe claiming J.B. Rhine is an ass. So it's a very interesting, tumultuous time for skeptics and believers alike. But with that, I will turn it over to the next slide and Nelson.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I'm Nelson Nauss, the executive director and co-founder of the Ghost Guild. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada, and French is my first language. In my daytime job, I work in data and analytics for a large academic medical center in Chapel Hill. I'll start our dive into instrumental transcommunication, how it got its start, and how it's evolved to become such a large part of today's as seen on TV paranormal investigations. So most of you have heard of Thomas Edison, the man who invented the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph, and the alkaline battery, just to name a few. Edison is still the fourth most prolific inventor in history with 1,093 patents in the US alone. So why am I invoking his name in reference to the paranormal? Well, the answer to that starts with an American magazine article from October of 1920. The headline read, "Edison working on how to communicate with the next world." This was the first that the public would hear about Edison's plans, but it wouldn't be the last. Edison would also talk about it with Scientific American magazine, where he shared some interesting opinions about life after death. If our personality survives, then it is strictly logical and scientific to assume that it retains memory, intellect, and other faculties and knowledge that we acquire on Earth. I am inclined to believe that our personality hereafter will be able to affect matter. If this reasoning be correct, then if we can evolve an instrument so delicate as to be affected, moved, or manipulated by our personality as it survives in the next life, such an instrument, when made available, ought to record something. So Edison never named this apparatus, but the media referred to it as spirit phone. Calling loved ones beyond the grave may have been appealing to the public, but for Edison, it was a matter of strict science. He was very critical of psychic mediums, calling them crude. He even said that their clients permit themselves to become, in a sense, hypnotized into thinking that their imaginings are actualities. He was concerned to discover that his idea was mixed with the occult, and that articles of his spirit phone were grouped with articles on mind reading, dreams, and likely the most insulting, why people laugh. So to counter this, he told the American magazine that his device would be scientific, not based on occult or other weird concepts. He said that he'd like to provide spiritualists with a device that would give them the opportunity to work strictly within the boundaries of science. I am engaged in the construction of one such apparatus now, and I hope to be able to finish it before very many months pass. It seems that Edison was proposing a more scientific approach to spiritualism and the methods employed at the time, such as the spirit boards that Christina mentioned. So was Edison successful? Considering that the apparatus was never mentioned again during his lifetime, we'd assume that this invention ended up in the failed category. In 1941, an effort was made to replicate the device for the purpose of contacting Edison. And that effort also failed. And perhaps adding insult to injury, the instructions for this attempt at communicating with Edison were allegedly given by him communicating through a medium. Regardless of the spirit film's outcome, it remains the desire of many to use technology to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Edison's concept of using an electronic device to communicate with non-physical entities is known as instrumental transcommunication, or ITC. And it includes its most popular form, known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. Now, going back to ever since recording devices have existed, people have spoken about hearing sounds on recordings that they say weren't audible at the time. However, it wasn't until the 1940s that experiments focusing on recording these voices from the dead started. For this presentation, it isn't possible to mention everyone involved in EVP research throughout the years, but we'll cover a notable few. The first was Attila von Zellis. From Hungarian descent, he was born in New York, but he moved to California to take on a career in photography. He was known to have psychic ability, which blossomed as the result of his yogic studies. It's even said that he had the ability to leave his body at will and allegedly enjoyed popping in on people now and then. So he began experimenting with a Packard Bell record cutter, and his results were disappointing. Having been a witness to Attila's ability, Raymond Bayless began collaborating on these experiments. And Raymond was a 21-year veteran of the Los Angeles psychic scene. Together, they conducted a number of recording sessions with the device that Bayless had devised and constructed using a reel-to-reel tape recorder. It consisted of a cabinet with an interior microphone resting inside a speaking trumpet used by the spiritualist mediums to amplify spirit voices. The microphone was connected to a tape recorder and a loudspeaker outside of the cabinet. And almost immediately, they began to hear and record whispers originating from inside the cabinet. So he believed these sounds to be the voices of discarnate spirits. Among the first recordings believed to be spirit voices were such messages as "This is G," "Hot Dog Art," and "Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all." Von Zellis and Bayless's work was published by the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1959. And Bayless later went on to co-author the book Phone Calls from the Dead. Moving to the early 1950s, two well-respected Roman Catholic dignitaries, Father Pellegrino Maria Ernetti and Father Agostino Gemelli, were attempting to record a live performance of a beloved Gregorian chant. During this recording, Father Gemelli's equipment chose to malfunction, and in exasperation, looking up and gesturing at the sky, verbally asked for assistance from his deceased father. When he later listened to the results of the recording, he was shocked to hear a voice. "Zucchini, it is I. It is clear. Do you not know it is I? I am always with you and help you." As a child, Father Gemelli was referred to by the name of Zucchini. He recognized the voice as his father, and according to Father Ernetti, Gemelli broke into a sweat. The voice reassured him, but he wondered if it might be the devil messing with him, and if what he had done was considered a sin in the eyes of the church. So with that concern, they went to ask Pope Pius XII, who listened to the recording and, patting Gemelli on the back, said that he really need not worry about this. The existence of this voice is strictly a scientific fact and nothing to do with spiritism. The recorder is totally objective. It receives and records only sound waves from wherever they come. This experiment perhaps become the cornerstone for a building of scientific studies which will strengthen people's faith in the hereafter. Even with the Pope's reassurance, fearing that what others might say, Gemelli held on to his recording until later in life. It wasn't released until the 90s. Now we'll transition to one of the most well-known EVP researchers. His name was Fredrik Jürgensen. He was a Swedish opera singer, painter, and film producer. He became interested in electronic voice phenomena after using his recorder to record bird song. When he played back the tape, he found that it was saturated with noise. Within that noise, a trumpet-like signal startled Jürgensen, and he then heard a Norwegian voice. Immediately after hearing this voice, the recording started playing all the bird sound that he had intended to record. On a future occasion, thinking something was wrong with his recorder, he once again was out in his garden recording birds, and on that tape, a voice appeared saying, "Friedrich, you are being watched. Friedel, can you hear me? It's Mummy." Friedel was his mother's special name for him, and hearing the voice of what he believed was his mother changed his life. He was convinced that he had succeeded in catching the voice of the dead, so he paused his career as an artist and concentrated on his recordings. At the onset, Jürgensen simply used a microphone attached to a tape recorder and let the tape roll. He spoke clearly and loudly into the room and then allowed for silence for the voices to appear. Later in his research, taking the advice given to him from one of the voices he recorded, he started experimenting with recording signals from the radio, thus becoming the first to combine the technique of recording voices using a radio as a medium to improve his results. In those experiments, he found the best radio frequency to be between 1,445 and 1,500 kilohertz. And since then, 1,485 kilohertz has been called the Jürgensen frequency. Now, Jürgensen went on to record many other voices. He called the language of these voices polyglot, meaning many tongues. Jürgensen detected a combination of Swedish, German, Russian, English, Italian, and so forth. He published 2 books, Voices from Space and Radio Contact with the Dead. Now, taking inspiration from Jürgensen's work, Hans Bender, a German parapsychologist, and Konstantin Rhodové, a Latvian psychologist, decided to further investigate the phenomenon. Now, although Rhodové was skeptical, he tried the technique himself and wound up with several voice recordings of his own, including recordings he believed to be his deceased mother. At first, Jürgensen and Rhodové collaborated, along with other scientists, on their research until they had differences in opinion and then decided to continue their research independently. Rhodové devised a method where the microphone is replaced with a germanium diode. This was the most common type of diode used in electronics, but have largely been replaced by silicon diodes. By plugging in a diode into a recorder instead of a microphone, he found that it improved the quality of the voices. Unlike a microphone, the receiver won't record the audio that we hear, but rather a soft white noise believed to be a means provided for either spirit manipulation or as a carrier for spiritual voices. Rhodové was also the first to attempt at characterizing the voices into distinct classes. He ranked the voices based on the ease of hearing them. Rhodové's research is documented in his book Breakthrough, and since its publication, this phenomenon is often referred to as Rhodové voices. Now, Sarah Esteep was known to be the most outspoken EVP researcher. Not only did Sarah believe that she had spoken to thousands of her deceased friends and relatives, but to aliens as well. In the early 80s, she started the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena to increase awareness and to create standards on how to capture it. She created the STEEP system, which replaced the Rotavay scale. With the release of her book, Voices of Eternity, the STEEP system became a global standard and remains the classification scale most used today, although other scales have since been created. The STEEP scale takes into account if a recording needs filtering and amplification. And now I'll hand it over to Allison, who will continue the topic of ITC.
Hey everyone, my name is Allison, and by day, I'm a senior information security analyst for a large financial institution. Don't let that scare you. I've always been fascinated with the unexplained, and I was absolutely thrilled to find like-minded people to spend my time with here in the Raleigh area. It wasn't long after I moved here that I started following the Ghost Guild, and I guess they decided I was never going to leave them alone, so they finally put me to work here doing historical research. So, on to the next slide, Nelson. And yeah, we're going to talk about spirit boxes, ghost boxes. When I talk about them, I'm talking about the same thing. So if I say spirit box, I mean ghost box, spirit box, they're interchangeable. So you can move on. Yeah, so we're going to fast forward to 2002. Some people believe that Frank Sumption had fulfilled Edison's promise by delivering what spiritualists needed. Frank believed that his special radio, later called a Frank's box, allowed spirits to speak with us. He was actually inspired by a how-to article about recording EVPs, and he was also said to have received instructions from the beyond. Sumption said the radio facilitated real-time communication between the living and the dead, not to mention extraterrestrials, angels, spirits, and assorted entities from other dimensions. He said that spirits could tune in and direct frequencies into forming words for real-time communication by using white noise and a radio suite. He was actually very adamant that no one had everything figured out, though. He was not building these devices for money. He just knew that something talks that is not radio, and it often addresses people that are nearby by their name, and sometimes it even cusses and swears. A total of 180 boxes were hand-built by Frank, and there are now companies that mass-produce similar devices, known as Spirit Box or Ghost Box, like I said, and we can transition to Gary Galka after that. So Gary, his 17-year-old daughter, Melissa, unfortunately died in 2004 in a car accident. He said that she began to communicate with the family within days. The doorbell would ring, TV channels would change, the lights would turn off and on. And that's when Gary realized that his daughter was trying to communicate and tell them something. So he used his knowledge of electromagnetic sensor systems and created the Melmeter 8704, which was actually named after his daughter and the year she was born, and then the year that he believes she passed into the spirit realm. And it has a digital readout of EMF, of course, on a red screen, and it also has an ambient temperature display. Gary has developed a bunch of devices, including the Spirit Box or Ghost Box, which is similar to the Frank's Box like I was talking about earlier. It's just more compact and has more sweeping options, and has become extremely popular with paranormal TV. Gary does claim that he's recorded his daughter saying, "Hi, Daddy, I love you," with the Spirit Box. And of course, the Galka family, they insist that these experiences are very real, and the instruments that he created do prove it. Next slide. So yeah, with that, let's discuss Hollywood and pop culture and how it helped in fueling and continued to fuel the interest in the paranormal throughout history and still today. Next slide. But before we move into movies, we want to take a look at where this all started. This is just a sampling of a timeline that shows as far back as 1601, ghosts were actually mentioned in Shakespeare's theater. No one could possibly forget, as we've mentioned many times, the many ghosts that Charles Dickens mentions in A Christmas Carol. But I have to move on for time's sake, but this shows that the paranormal has been around a long time in pop culture. Next slide. So The Exorcist in 1973 played a huge role in paranormal and how it's viewed by culture. Some say it had a major effect on society, and it helped in fueling what was later called the Satanic Panic. That is when Ouija boards became feared, and there was a lot more religious exorcisms. There's moral panic over heavy metal, and supposedly messages were being spread in music. But then Ghostbusters, of course, provided a much more lighthearted look at ghost hunting. And it was actually rooted in Dan Aykroyd's very real interest in the paranormal. He actually wrote a foreword in the book, A History of Ghosts, The True Story of Seances, Mediums, Ghosts, and Ghostbusters, which was actually written by his own father, Peter Aykroyd. He said that his family was part of a worldwide social phenomenon that was driven by a wish to make contact with spirits of the dead. Next slide. The Warrens, these folks were famous for cases like Amityville, Annabelle, The Conjuring, The Haunting of Connecticut, and numerous more. Ed was a self-proclaimed demonologist and Lauren a self-proclaimed clairvoyant, which really brought an interesting element to investigations. They investigated countless paranormal occurrences over the years, including the possessed house in Amityville on Long Island. And it, of course, was made famous by the 1979 movie, The Amityville Horror, which had tons of remakes, sequels, and prequels. Ed and Lorraine were members of the Roman Catholic Church, and they believed that demonic forces were likely to possess those who lacked faith, which was obviously based on their religion. More modern investigators didn't necessarily think that they were doing good scientific investigations because they already had a predetermined conclusion, which they adhered to literally and religiously. But overall, they did contribute a great deal to the field of paranormal research and help maintain that interest in the unexplained. Next slide. And here are the OGs. These are the more modern paranormal investigators on TV. These are the ones that we're most familiar with. And on these shows, we see, of course, the devices that Gary Galka created and used, and lots of the ITC and EVP work, and the introduction of many more black box devices, which we'll go into later. Especially ghost hunters, they started out doing a lot more scientific techniques and, were really big into debunking things. But as time goes on, and perhaps to retain interest, we're seeing a lot more drama associated with the paranormal shows. And we should always question, of course, what is real versus what is scripted, who really has the creative control, et cetera. Next slide. So many of the popular investigators are actually breaking out of the norm and creating their own content on YouTube, podcasts, and other social channels to keep that creative control. Most of them are sticking to ghosts and the more scientific research. However, we're seeing a broadening of paranormal ideas when it comes to other unusual topics, and even some overlap in these shows, especially those without the network backing. We see some of the Bigfoot hunters carrying around paranormal equipment because maybe Bigfoot's a ghost. Maybe we've been communicating with aliens this whole time. Are these things slipping into a different time or a multiverse? Perhaps this is just time travel. Some really interesting thoughts and just mostly entertaining. But it does continue that interest in the paranormal, of course, and the pop culture. And next slide. Now we're going to talk about tools of this trade that are more popular now. And move on. Yeah, so along with Frank's box and Gary Galka's creations, many black box devices have hit the scene on paranormal TV. There's a huge surge in the creation of these devices that light up and beep. They make for great TV and jump scares. However, when doing a real paranormal investigation, it really helps to understand the inner workings of these devices and how they might steer an investigation. For example, the SLS camera that we see on TV, it was actually designed to find a human shape for the old Xbox Kinect. And it will actually turn a chair or just about anything into a stick figure. REM pods can easily go off or light up if someone's using a walkie-talkie nearby. So it's just good to understand why something's lighting up or beeping. We don't at all discourage the use of these devices, but of course, if always gain a better understanding of how they work before you use them on an investigation. So how should we use some of these devices, new and old, to make sure we're not making something out of nothing? We try to remove the human element. So with the spirit box, you can often experience audio pareidoia. Audio pareidoia is when our minds fill in the blanks, or when we're already thinking of a particular outcome and we hear the words that fit that specific narrative. Sometimes people can hear something completely different than someone else. You can just Google Laurel versus Yanni to get a very good example of that. So the Estes method is a very popular investigation technique right now for the spirit box, and it helps a little bit with that audio pareidoia. It's named the Estes method since it was first used in Estes Park, Colorado, and the very famous Stanley Hotel by the resident ghost hunters. So how it's used is one person, which we'll call the receiver, has to have the spirit box plugged in to soundproof headphones so they can't hear the questions being asked. And they're also blindfolded so they can't guess or read lips of what is being asked. So once that's done, all the other investigators in the room can ask questions. And the receiver just says out loud anything that they're hearing through the spirit box. And of course, the hope is that the answers come back, that they're relevant to what is actually being asked. All right, next slide. So another human element is the ideomotor response. This is a well-known psychological phenomenon where a person makes motions unconsciously. This happens a lot with things like dowsing rods, Ouija boards, even pendulums. So some ideas for removing that human element is to use a level or a flat surface when using these dowsing rods instead of your hands. You can see an example in the picture we have. With Ouija boards, you can actually use a pressure plate to determine if someone is unknowingly putting pressure on that planchette. The next slide. So these are some of the tools that we use, mostly lossless recorders. So ones that, are in like wave format and aren't compressed. We use a lot of ambient sound recorders in the outside of properties. So if we hear something inside, we can check those outside recorders to make sure it wasn't, someone outside yelling or an owl hooting. We use lots of ambisonic recorders that record in 360 in the rooms. A lot of the tools that we use are used to eliminate the possibility of something being paranormal or, interpreting it incorrectly. So like the level we see here, if there's a claim that there's a cabinet opening, we might use the level to see if it's just the construction of the cabinet that's making it happen. We also spend a lot of time tagging on those recorders. So if we walk into a room where there's a camera or audio devices, we always announce ourselves. And that way, when we review our data later, we don't spend a lot of time analyzing something that's not paranormal. We also note if we cough, sneeze, shuffle our feet, insert bodily function here. We don't whisper. That way, like I said, later on, we don't listen back and, think it's a demon or something. So, and with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And Nelson, what we got?
Which is me.
Yay!
So that actually concludes the presentation. But before we get into a Q&A and select the person that will be entered into our drawing, we do have a few announcements that we'd like to make. The first one is that we're thrilled to be making an in-person return for our annual Haunted Mordecai presentation. And that is this Saturday, I'm sorry, not this Saturday, following Saturday, October 28th. We'll have 3 presentations in the visitor classroom, 1 to 12, then at 1 and at 2. And we'll unveil the latest findings of our investigations within the park as the exclusive paranormal research team for Mordecai Historic Park. Attending this event actually gives you another opportunity to be entered into our drawing, our Halloween drawing. And in addition to that drawing, as we have been doing every year, we will also be selecting one person who attends for them to win the opportunity to join us on a future investigation of the park. This presentation is part of the Spellbound at Mordecai event, which starts at 10 a.m. You can meet mysterious characters, witness astounding magicians, have your fortune revealed, and craft your own pumpkin to take home for All Hallows Eve. So you can also explore a variety of bewitching handmade items and the delectable treats from vendors and delight in family-friendly stage performance. So mark your calendars for Saturday, October 28th, and join us at Mordecai Historic Park for an enchanting event. Also, if you find yourself in the Winston-Salem area, the evening of October 24th, consider joining us for our Haunting History, the Spirit of the Law presentation with Forsyth Public Library System. This program, we navigate the fascinating world of the paranormal through the lens of the law, and also share data and some personal experiences from some of our investigations, and provide insights into the scientific methods and techniques employed to uncover and analyze paranormal phenomena. We recently concluded 4 of these presentations with Wake County Public Libraries, and we look forward to bringing this to Winston-Salem next week. Also, the Ghost Guild does host at least one public investigation per year, and that is where we invite the public to join us and become part of our team for one night. This one event helps us collect the necessary funds for our annual operating expenses, and we appreciate the opportunity to spend quality time with folks that follow us and are interested in learning more about the paranormal. We limit tickets to about 20 or so, and they traditionally sell out within a couple of hours. We make the tickets available to our mailing list or VIP mailing list members before they're made available to the public. And this November, we'll be announcing ticket sales for our next event, which is on April 6th. And if you're interested, we recommend you sign up for our mailing list so that you can also receive advance notice. And we do hope to see you aboard. And lastly, we do co-host a group called Spirits and Spooks. It is a group available on Facebook. So you can just search on Facebook for Spirits and Spooks. It is a monthly and judgment-free gathering of like-minded people where we meet at a restaurant over drinks or food and just talk about the paranormal. So if anyone's interested in that, please consider joining that group, and we hope to see you at one of those gatherings. We do appreciate anyone who is interested in following us, either via Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or our mailing list. We've made those QR codes available here. You can also access our website at theghostguild.com. And with that, I think we will go to a Q&A before we select the winner. Do we have Stacy, do we have a moderator for the Q&A?
Thank you, guys. Yeah, we do. So we have our adult programs intern, Destiny, and she is going to go through the chat and ask you guys all of our attendees questions.
Hello, so we do have quite a few questions. This first one comes from Kim Johnson from Cleveland. Is modern spiritualism / paranormal investigation influenced by any practices or beliefs that have their origins in non-Western / mainstream thoughts / culture / ideas?
Yes. I mean, I think that, you know, it's interesting because we talk about, you know, I talked about Samhain with, you know, the Celtic culture. When we talk about, you know, like the British paranormal societies in America, but a lot of these things actually span all across the world. So kind of like we were talking about ancient Mesopotamia, you know, there's a person that I follow who's from Jerusalem. And for many years, he's actually been going around and collecting the folklore from Israel and Palestine and kind of recording different people's ghost stories and doing some paranormal investigating himself. And, you know, this can be found all across the world, Africa, Arab countries, you know, it's everywhere. And I think that it's hard to even say where specific things started, because if you look at different cultures and religions, there's so many things that are more similar than there are different. So yeah, it's found all over the world.
All right, and our next question is from Chandler Mason from Capitol Hill. What is the spookiest place y'all have investigated in North Carolina or elsewhere?
Who wants to take that one?
What was the question?
The spookiest places we've investigated. Spookiest places we've investigated in Carolina.
North Carolina. I can think of North Carolina. I can think of Moundsville though.
Well, yeah, I'm not, maybe I'm thinking like spooky isn't scary, but
Moundsville's scary.
well, no, but I have to call out specific to North Carolina. I would probably have to call out the battleship as being one of our most go-to places.
Yeah.
I know I've spent 18 nights aboard. I wouldn't say that it's spooky, but it's certainly one of the locations. I mean, it's hit or miss. There was plenty of nights that we've been there where we've had some things that we couldn't explain. Just as many nights that we've been there where nothing happening. But either way, it's always a phenomenal experience. And it's probably one of the places I feel that we've had the most things happen that we've not been able to explain yet.
That's true. And it's dark and impossible to navigate, at least for me.
Yeah, because they did something
Yeah.
off the lights at night.
All right, this next question, oh, sorry, is from Terry Murray. What is the most haunted place in North Carolina, in your opinion?
Asheville. I mean, that's for me, it's Asheville. Like I love the battleship and, you know, I love the Mordecai house, like, but my friends who have had homes in Asheville have been the most haunted places I've experienced. So when you're not expecting ghosts and they're just all around you doing crazy things, that to me is very telling. And I've had multiple friends who have lived in Asheville that have had just wild experiences.
Not to mention, it's a beautiful place to visit.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's not bad to visit.
It's good and good, which would not be a bad place to investigate either, right?
No.
All right, this next question is from Tracy Farr. Have you ever used spirit boards in your investigations?
I don't think so.
Nope.
We should, just for fun.
I mean, I feel like there's so many things that we do to communicate. Like, I haven't yet seen a reason like why we need a Ouija board versus, you know, just talking and asking questions or a ghost box. Or I feel like they're all forms of communication. It just depends on how you do it.
All right, and I do have another question from Mags. Where did you have your first experience with the paranormal, if you can think of it?
So mine was as a child in my childhood home. I think I was probably about 7 years old or so. So that would be mine. I know Kelly has one as well. I know she's shared that before.
Smithfield Road in Knightdale, North Carolina.
Very specific.
Very specific.
You know the specific address?
Where they built the highway that cuts across and you can get off on Smithfield Road. That is exactly where we saw the man who was enveloped in the glow of white when I was 16 years old in the middle of the night.
Anyone else on the scene want to share their first?
Hi. No, okay.
All right, and I have a question from Annette Smith. Do you believe that Halloween opens the spirit veil?
Halloween opens
The spirit, yeah. Who would believe it?
I believe it in my own worldview. I'd like to believe that, but I also, my family sometimes celebrate Obon, so our relationship with the afterlife and family members of the past are very much close at hand for us. So that's my personal background.
I believe that as things get colder and quieter, you don't hear as many, leaves and wildlife. I believe that you just become more aware of things. I don't know if it's particularly the veil, but I will say that when I've investigated places in the winter, fall and winter, when it was cold versus, summer and spring, I tend to get more activity then. So there might be something to that, I guess is what I'm saying.
And to play devil's advocate, could it be also that it is the time of the year where people think about this more and are more open to it, and as a result, there are more things that tend to happen. Just a thought.
Sure.
All right, and one last question from Nanette. Nanette says, what about smells? My house is 190 years old, and at 2:09 a.m. every night you can smell cherry pipe tobacco. Everyone that has visited me has smelled it, never said anything about it to any of them. I do have a cemetery on the property, and I have looked high and low for the smell, just happens at that time. What are your thoughts?
I love it.
I think it's awesome.
Kelly's like, we'll be there in a few hours.
Yes. Expect us there.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think smells are a very interesting phenomenon. I think Nelson would probably say maybe like a more residual sort of energy. I know when my grandmother passed away, after her death, I would smell her. Like I would be driving in the car and all of a sudden I would smell her perfume, which, is a very distinct smell for a 90-year-old woman who passed away, who had a very specific perfume that she would wear. And so, we've been in locations where, we were at Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky recently. And all of a sudden in one room, we had this strong smell of coffee. And it just lasted for a moment. We all smelled it and we were like, do you smell this coffee? And confirmed that nobody randomly made coffee at 3 o'clock in the morning. But I feel like there's some way that is unexplainable where some sort of spiritual energy is able to like reproduce smell. I don't know what that is, but I've had those experiences. So I feel like that's valid.
Yeah, there are often people that report having these phantom smells, and it's one of the reasons why whenever we do investigations, we very purposefully ask folks not to wear any cologne or perfume or any smells like that, so that we can eliminate anything we do smell as being one of the investigators. Because we've had a case like that when we were at Waverly. I remember walking by an area that used to be the kitchen, getting all excited because I smelled like maple syrup, like waffles and maple syrup. Just to find out 10 minutes later that someone had just walked by and was vaping maple syrup flavored. So that one of the reasons why you don't want to do that. But no, it is a very common thing that's reported are smells that aren't explainable. So very interesting.
All right, you guys. Well, I think that wraps up our Q&A portion for this evening. Ghost Guild, thank you so much. This has been incredible. We are so thankful to partner with y'all. Gosh, I guess it's been like the last 3 years. We're so thankful that you guys have brought us your stories and investigations every year. And this is just really cool. So thank you so much.
We do
All right,
wanna have
Nelson, are you
select-
going to spin us and see who
I'm
wins?
gonna
the-
spin it.
All
We
right.
Put in the 324 people that registered.
Who's it gonna be?
Oh, the suspense is killing me.
I know, I feel like there should be a drum roll.
All right, Stacey,
76. All
we're
right.
76.
That is, hold on, let me scroll down. That is Kelly Culver. Kelly, are you on the call still? Oh gosh, let's see. Hold on.
There does not appear to be Kelly in the attendees.
Oh, yes,
Oh,
I'm here.
yeah.
Kelly Jones.
Okay, cool. Kelly, if you want to drop your contact info, like an email address in the chat, that would be awesome.
That, or if you feel more comfortable doing, you can send an email to contact@theghostguild.com.
Hey, Kelly's.
Yeah, I know.
Never had a
So
Kelly one.
many.
So in the meantime, while Kelly's deciding what way she wants to get in touch with everybody, I want to thank Ghost Guild one more time, and thank those of you who joined us this evening. We hope to see you at our next History and Highballs, decorating the Executive Mansion with First Lady Kristen Cooper and designer Christy De Francesco. That's taking place over Zoom on Thursday, November 20th at 7 p.m. Until that time, we hope that all of you have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you guys. Bye.